Get a life. My husband told me in front of his entire family during our anniversary dinner, as he toasted to new beginnings without dead weight. You're not a partner, you're a project I gave up on. I just nodded. Hours later, his boss walked in, looked at me, and said something that shocked him. It was a warm evening in Charleston. April. Early spring, when the air has that lazy humidity that clings to your skin and makes everything feel just a little heavier than it needs to. The kind of air that makes your bones ache before anything else does. We were having our 12th anniversary dinner at his parents' beach house on Sullivan's Island. My husband, Miles, had insisted on something memorable this year. No surprise getaway, no romantic night out, just a dinner with his family. Everyone dressed up. A private chef. Too many wine glasses on the table. It was all overly curated, like everything else he did. I wore a pale blue dress I hadn't put on in years. The zipper was a little tight around the ribs, but it made my shoulders look elegant, and I hadn't felt elegant in a while. I curled my hair in big soft waves and added a little shimmer to my cheekbones, even though the ocean breeze would probably sweep it all away. I smiled. I played my part. Miles was always performing. His charm had an audience, and tonight it was his mother, Maeve, his brother Corbin, and Corbin's newest girlfriend, some 20-something whose name I never caught, plus his niece, Calla, and a few others I didn't know well. Everyone looked sun-kissed and slightly too pleased with themselves, like a commercial for generational wealth. Dinner was grilled sea bass and lemon risotto, served on plates that looked like they cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Miles had hired a local sommelier to pair wines with each course. It was all too much for what was supposed to be our anniversary. I kept quiet through most of dinner, not really contributing to the loud stories about hedge funds and startups and someone's new investment property in Asheville. I could feel the tension tightening in my throat with every passing toast and subtle jab. Maeve had already made 2 comments about how tired I looked. Corbin had jokingly asked if I still worked or if I had finally given up on the hospital life. I smiled through all of it. Then, after dessert, Miles stood up. He tapped his glass with a fork, the clink echoing in the room. Everyone went quiet. I want to make a toast, he said, lifting his glass like he was accepting an Oscar. To new beginnings. Everyone raised theirs in unison. Even I did, though my hands were shaking slightly. He turned toward me with that practiced smirk. To letting go of dead weight, he said, eyes locked on mine. Laughter. A few gasps. Even the sommelier blinked like he wasn't sure if he should pretend he didn't hear it. Then the final blow. You're not a partner, Miles said, still staring at me. You're a project. One I gave up on. There it was. In front of everyone. No one said a word. No one stood up for me. No one asked him to stop. I nodded. That was all I could do. I nodded, took a small sip from my glass, and stared into the stem like it could transport me anywhere but there. He sat back down like nothing had happened. It wasn't even anger that filled me. It was something deeper. A quiet recognition that I had ceased to matter in his world a long time ago, and now he was just finally saying it out loud. But here's the part he didn't know. 2 weeks earlier, I had received a message on LinkedIn from someone named Albert Keene. I didn't recognize the name at first, but when I clicked on his profile, I almost dropped my phone. Albert was the CEO of East Bay Tech Solutions, the very company Miles worked for. I knew the name because Miles had spent the last 5 years bragging about how he single-handedly built their marketing strategy. He talked about Albert like some outdated man who didn't understand modern branding. The message was simple: "Hi, I hope this isn't too strange. I know this is unusual, but I need to speak with you privately about Miles." At first, I ignored it. Then, after a sleepless night and a couple hours of internet sleuthing, I replied. I met Albert the next day at a cafe near MUSC Medical Center. He was older than I expected. Early 60s. Gray hair. Tired eyes. Wore a wedding ring that he kept fidgeting with while we talked. He got straight to the point. I know Miles is your husband, he said, leaning forward. But I also know he's using your laptop and possibly your credentials to send company documents to a competitor. My blood ran cold. I didn't want to believe it. But deep down, I already did. I need to know if you've given him permission to do that. Because if you haven't, we have a much bigger problem. I hadn't. Not even close. But I also hadn't asked questions when he borrowed my laptop last fall because his was in for maintenance. I never thought I'd be the kind of wife who got dragged into her husband's professional downfall. But there I was. Right in the middle of it. So I told Albert everything I knew. He showed me emails, my email address. Attachments with company forecasts, private client lists, data that should never leave the firewall. It was all there. And it was criminal. Albert looked me in the eyes and said, I don't think you're part of this. I think you're collateral damage. But I need your help. I agreed. Not for Albert. Not even for justice. I did it because I finally realized something. I'd been asleep in my own life. And I was ready to wake up. So when Miles publicly humiliated me during our anniversary dinner, he thought he was delivering the final blow. He had no idea it was just the beginning. After that dinner, I didn't go home with him. I told everyone I wasn't feeling well, which wasn't a lie. The tension had settled into my spine like cement. I slipped out without much of a goodbye. No one really noticed. Or if they didn't care enough to stop me. Miles didn't even look up from his phone. I drove to Nora's house in West Ashley. She was the kind of friend who didn't ask too many questions, who always had a bottle of decent wine and soft blankets on hand. When I showed up at her door at almost midnight with mascara tracks still drying on my cheeks, she didn't say a word. Just opened the door, handed me a glass, and made space on the couch. The next morning, my phone had 3 messages from Miles. You embarrassed yourself last night. It didn't have to go like that. You'll be hearing from my lawyer soon. There was no apology. No regret. Just the arrogance of a man who assumed he still had the upper hand. What he didn't know was that Albert and I had a meeting scheduled that afternoon. Not over coffee this time. This time, it was at East Bay Tech's headquarters. Downtown Charleston. 8th floor. All glass and white leather in quiet halls that made your footsteps sound too loud. Albert greeted me at reception himself. He had 2 folders in his hand and a look on his face that I can only describe as grim satisfaction. He's already here, he said. You ready? I nodded. I didn't feel ready. I felt like I was walking into the lion's den with nothing but a half-broken umbrella. But I nodded anyway. When we walked into the conference room, Miles was sitting at the head of the table like he owned it. He saw me first, then Albert. His face twisted in that practiced smirk that used to charm me but now just made my stomach turn. Well, he said, lounging back in his chair, if this is about what I think it's about, we could have handled this privately. Albert didn't respond right away. He sat down across from Miles and slid one of the folders across the table. This is private, he said. And official. Miles flipped open the folder, and I watched his face fall like a curtain dropping on a bad play. Inside were printouts of every email, every file transfer, every confidential document sent from my account. Every time-stamped log from our Wi-Fi router. Everything he thought he had covered up. He looked at me like he couldn't believe it. You went through my stuff? I didn't respond. You let this happen? Still, I said nothing. Albert leaned forward. Calm. Direct. You're terminated, effective immediately. You'll be escorted out after this meeting. Legal will be in touch. Miles' mouth opened, then shut again. He looked stunned for the first time in years. He had always been the one pulling strings. The one in control. The one people answered to. Now he was just another man who thought he was untouchable, until he wasn't. And one more thing, Albert added, glancing at me. He pulled out the second folder and placed it gently in front of me. She's joining us as Director of Patient Engagement. We've been needing someone with healthcare experience who knows how to navigate systems and people. Her references were excellent. Miles blinked, eyes darting between us. You're kidding, he said. Her? It was the first time he'd said something that truly sounded like disbelief. Albert shrugged. She's got a better track record than you. And integrity. That was the moment it hit him. Not just that he'd lost his job, but that I'd stopped being the silent, pliable wife he could humiliate without consequence. He stood up, mouth twitching like he wanted to say more, but Albert waved to security through the glass wall. 2 people walked in, politely, professionally, and asked Miles to collect his things. He hesitated. Looked at me. You planned this, he said, barely above a whisper. I met his eyes, finally, and said the only thing I could muster, no. You did. And just like that, he was gone. The room stayed silent for a long minute. Albert broke it with a sigh. You okay? I wasn't. But I would be. I think so, I said. We went over the details of my role, but most of it was a blur. My head felt like it was full of cotton and static. I wasn't used to winning. I didn't know what it felt like to come out ahead. By the time I left the building, the Charleston sky was overcast, the kind of low, heavy gray that looked like it could rain or do nothing at all. I sat in my car and let the quiet wrap around me. And then I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I finally felt the weight lifting. For the first time in years, I wasn't pretending. I wasn't performing. I wasn't managing someone else's image of me. I was just me. But that was only the beginning. Because what came next wasn't just about career shifts or taking back power. It was about facing everything I had let slide. All the quiet moments of disrespect. The slow erosion of my self-worth. The nights I told myself things would get better if I just tried harder. Turns out, I didn't need to try harder. I needed to leave. The next few weeks were a strange mix of silence and noise. Silence in my house, our house, that Miles hadn't returned to since that day in the conference room. His clothes were still in the closet. His toothbrush sat untouched. There were unopened Amazon packages with his name on them piled near the front door. And noise in my head. Not the panicked kind. Not even the angry kind. Just busy. Thoughts running on a loop. Playing and replaying all the moments I had ignored, excused, or minimized over the years. Little comments that chipped away at me. Eye rolls when I spoke too long. The way he always talked over me at dinners. The way he'd joke that I had no ambition, that I was too soft for the real world. It had been there all along. I had just gotten so used to the static that I didn't hear it anymore. Nor came over the next Saturday with muffins and coffee, the unofficial care package of exhausted women. She sat cross-legged on the floor while I stood by the kitchen island flipping through the lease agreement for my new apartment. You're sure about this? She asked. I nodded. Yeah. I need a clean start. No ghosts. She looked around the house, at the white walls and designer lighting fixtures Miles had insisted on when we remodeled last year. He never really made room for you here, did he? No, I said. I was just filler. The move-out date was set for the end of the month. I gave myself 2 weeks to sort the rest of it out, divorce filings, my new job, logistics. I kept things organized like I was in triage mode. Miles, for his part, finally texted me. We need to talk. You're being dramatic. Let's be adults. I didn't respond. Then 2 days later, I don't think it's smart to make this ugly. We can settle this quickly if you don't get petty. That one made me laugh. Petty? He publicly humiliated me. He used my laptop to commit fraud. He trashed our marriage with the glee of a man winning a bet. But I was being petty? Still, I didn't reply. I passed everything to my lawyer, who was a fierce, quiet woman named Renee that Miles used to call overly aggressive when I brought her name up in other conversations. Now she was my wall, my guard dog, and my megaphone. She handled every communication. And she did it without blinking. "There's more here than we expected," she told me during our second meeting. "He moved more money than I initially saw. Looks like he tried to shift funds into a brokerage account under a shell name before the company caught him." I swallowed hard. "Is that criminal?" "Yes," she said. "But we'll let them handle that. You just focus on you." I didn't even know what focusing on me looked like anymore. I started showing up to work at East Bay Tech, slowly finding my rhythm in the new role. It was surreal being in the same building where Miles had been praised and promoted for years. People gave me long looks in the elevator, whispered as I walked past. I didn't care. Let them talk. Let them wonder. I did my job. Well. Quietly. Thoroughly. I brought in my nursing experience and reshaped the entire outreach strategy. Albert didn't micromanage me, he trusted me. It felt weird at first. And then, it felt like breathing again. One afternoon, as I was grabbing lunch at the cafe downstairs, I saw Maeve. Miles' mother. She was sitting near the window, sipping tea and flipping through a real estate brochure. I almost walked past her, pretending not to see her, but she looked up right as I turned to leave. Our eyes met. She raised one eyebrow, just slightly, and said, "So it's true then?" I didn't answer. I just looked at her. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit. Or don't." "But I'm talking." Against my better judgment, I sat. She watched me for a long moment. That old, icy condescension was still there in her gaze. But something else, too. Pity, maybe? "I told him not to marry you," she said bluntly. "I told him you'd slow him down." I didn't flinch. He didn't need help ruining his own life. She gave a sharp little laugh. "You think you've won, don't you?" I tilted my head. "I think I survived." There was a beat of silence between us. Then, quietly, she said, "He's in Texas now. With some woman named Brielle. Says he's starting fresh." I shrugged. "Good for Brielle." She stared at me. "You were never one of us." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm still standing." I got up and walked away. Later that night, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, overlooking the marsh. The air smelled like salt and earth, and the cicadas were in full chorus. Juno, the rescue dog I'd adopted, laid curled at my feet, snoring gently. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel bitter. I just felt real. And I hadn't felt that in a long, long time. But the healing part? That was still coming. And so was everything else I had denied myself for years. The story wasn't over. It was just finally mine to tell. The real turning point didn't come with the confrontation at the office. It didn't come with the divorce papers, or the whispers at work, or even the smug look that finally slid off Miles' face when he realized I had power he never accounted for. It came slowly, in pieces. Little, unglamorous moments that built into something solid. Like getting approved for a solo mortgage on a small townhouse near Avondale. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't beachfront. But it was mine. Every chipped tile, every creaky stair. I repainted the walls myself over a long weekend. Sage green in the kitchen. A soft, dusky lavender in the bedroom. Warm whites everywhere else. It felt like breathing in color for the first time in years. It came in moments like catching myself laughing. Real laughing. At something Nor said while we shared wine and Thai takeout on my couch. The kind of laugh that made my ribs ache in the best way. Or the first time I hosted dinner. Just a few friends, mismatched chairs around my dining table, candles flickering low. Nobody was performing. Nobody needed to prove anything. And I sat there in the middle of it all, barefoot and at ease, thinking, this This is what peace feels like. Meanwhile, Miles was unraveling. Quietly. Predictably. Renee updated me occasionally, only when it mattered. His attempt to fight the prenup? Dismissed. The judge didn't even let it get far. His efforts to hide assets? Uncovered easily. We got half of what he tried to hide, plus attorney's fees. Albert made sure his professional reputation didn't recover either. Not out of spite, just because facts matter. The tech industry talks, and word spread fast. No one wanted to take a risk on someone who burned bridges with NDAs still warm. I never gloated. I didn't post about it. Didn't tell anyone outside my circle. I didn't need to. Watching him trip over the very schemes he used to belittle me with? That was enough. The final revenge didn't come with some dramatic, scream-filled confrontation. It came in the form of a gala. East Bay Tech's annual Health Tech Charity Gala, to be specific. Held at the Cedar Room downtown, an old cigar factory turned event space. It was all exposed brick and Edison bulbs, the kind of place Miles would have called aesthetic. I was invited not just as an employee, but as a speaker. I nearly said no. I still didn't love attention. But Albert encouraged me. Said the board wanted someone real. Someone who'd been on both sides of the patient care divide. So I said yes. I wore a dark emerald dress that hugged in the right places and made my skin look like caramel under the lights. My hair was pinned up, makeup soft but intentional. Noor came with me, beaming the whole night like a proud older sister. I gave a 10-minute speech. Nothing fancy. I just told the story of the nurse who spent 12 years trying to do more with less, who now worked with people building the tools she always wished she had. People clapped. I even saw some wiping their eyes. I stepped off stage, heart racing, and walked straight into him. Miles. Standing near the bar. Alone. He looked different. Not bad. Just smaller. As if the scaffolding of his ego had finally collapsed and he was trying to remember how to stand without it. Didn't think I'd see you here, he said, hands in his pockets. I work here, I replied calmly. He nodded, looking around like he didn't know what to say. You look successful. I gave a small smile. I am. He cleared his throat. Listen, about the dinner, don't, I interrupted gently. That version of me, the one you tried to humiliate, is gone. You don't owe her an apology anymore. She's not here. He blinked. And the version in front of me? She doesn't need your apology. That stunned him. Not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. Final. Then I tilted my head, almost like an afterthought. Brielle didn't come with you? He looked away, jaw tight. We're not together anymore. Shame, I said softly, sipping from my glass. She seemed like a fresh start. Before he could say another word, I turned and walked away. I didn't need to look back. Because the best revenge wasn't watching him fall. It was realizing I had stopped waiting for him to see my worth. He could keep his toast to new beginnings. Mine didn't need an audience. And as I stepped outside onto the candlelit patio, feeling the spring air on my skin, Noor clinked her glass against mine and said, to the project he gave up on. I laughed. No, I said, raising my glass higher. To the architect I became instead.